Good evening, and welcome to Stories for Sleep. I'm Simon, your host for the night. As you settle in, take a deep breath and let your worries drift away. Tonight's tale takes us to a majestic forest where the mischievous Chuck sets out on a mission to protect his home from ruthless loggers. Before we begin tonight's sleep story, let's take a few moments to prepare for a restful slumber. Take a deep breath and exhale, releasing any tension in your body. Find a comfortable position in your bed and allow yourself to sink into it. Tonight's tale takes us to the heart of a dense forest where the trees tower high and the leaves rustle in the gentle breeze. As the moon rises and the stars twinkle above, the forest comes alive with the sounds of nocturnal creatures. As you listen to this story, allow your mind to wander into the peaceful embrace of the forest. Let the gentle rustling of the leaves and the distant hoots of owls soothe you into a deep, restful sleep. Close your eyes and let yourself drift off into the tranquility of the forest. Chuck the Woodchuck was not like any other woodchucks that lived in the forest. He was mischievous, cunning, and always had a hidden agenda. He was known for his sharp mind and his quick reflexes, which helped him out of tricky situations. But what made him stand out from the rest of the woodchucks was the fact that he had diamonds on his shoes. Chuck the Woodchuck was a master of deception. He had a mischievous glint in his eye that hinted at his cunning ways. He was always thinking and planning his next move, carefully calculating every step he took. Chuck was known for his sharp mind, which he used to outwit his enemies and get himself out of tricky situations. Chuck's quick reflexes were also a big part of what made him stand out from the other woodchucks. He was incredibly agile and could move with lightning speed when he needed to. He had a keen sense of awareness, which allowed him to react quickly to any danger that came his way. Despite his mischievous nature, Chuck was not reckless. He always had a hidden agenda and was careful not to reveal his true intentions. He was a master of manipulation, and he could convince anyone to do his bidding with just a few words. Chuck had a way of making his enemies feel as though they were in control, only to turn the tables on them at the last minute. Chuck's cunning nature also meant that he was always one step ahead of his enemies. He would anticipate their every move and plan accordingly, often turning their plans against them. He was not afraid to take risks, and he would always find a way to come out on top. Chuck's mischievousness, cunning, and quick reflexes were all a part of what made him such a formidable opponent. He was a creature to be reckoned with, and few dared to cross him. Chuck was a unique and cunning woodchuck, and he would continue to outsmart his enemies and live life on his terms. Chuck's shoes were his pride and joy. They were made of the softest leather and were a perfect fit for his small feet. The diamonds on his shoes were of the highest quality and shone brightly, catching the attention of all who saw them. Chuck loved the attention that his shoes brought him, and he often found himself tapping them on the ground, making the diamonds sparkle in the sunlight. However, Chuck's temper was a different story. It was as explosive as the diamonds on his shoes, and he had a hard time controlling it. If anyone dared to cross him or challenge him, his temper would flare up like a raging fire. It was no secret in the forest that Chuck had a quick temper, and many creatures tried to avoid crossing him to prevent his wrath. Chuck was a skilled woodchuck, and he had a deep understanding of the forest's ecosystem. He knew where to find the best food and how to avoid danger. He moved quietly and gracefully, blending into his surroundings like a true predator. But Chuck's expertise in the woods went beyond survival skills. He had a keen eye for spotting valuable items, and he had a gift for planning and executing daring heists. He had a Robin Hood-like mentality, stealing from the wealthy creatures in the forest and redistributing their wealth to those in need. He would sneak into their homes and take only what he needed, leaving no trace of his presence behind. Despite his notoriety as a thief, Chuck was respected by many of the forest's inhabitants. He had a reputation for being a just and fair thief, only taking from those who could afford to lose and giving to those who needed it most. He was also known for his generosity, often sharing his loot with those who helped him carry out his schemes. Chuck's actions had not gone unnoticed, and many of the animals in the forest were on the lookout for him. They had formed a posse, hoping to catch him and bring him to justice. But Chuck was always one step ahead of them. He moved through the forest quickly and quietly, always watching his back and keeping his eyes peeled for danger. He had to be careful not to leave any traces behind, and he often wore gloves to avoid leaving fingerprints on any stolen items. Despite the risks involved, Chuck continued with his Robin Hood-like activities. He felt a sense of satisfaction in helping those in need, and he couldn't resist the thrill of the heist. As he moved through the forest, he could feel the adrenaline pumping through his veins. He knew that he was taking a risk, but he couldn't help himself. But as the posse grew larger, Chuck knew that he had to be even more careful. He began to spend more time planning his heists, carefully choosing his targets, and considering every possible outcome. He knew that one mistake could lead to his capture, and he didn't want to end up in jail. Despite the danger, Chuck couldn't resist the thrill of the heist, and he continued to steal from the rich and give to the poor, always watching his back and staying one step ahead of the posse. One day, Chuck stumbled upon an endless lumber stack in a place where there was no love. The wood belonged to a group of wealthy loggers who had been cutting down trees without any regard for the forest or its inhabitants. Chuck knew he had to do something to stop them. Chuck knew he had to act fast, but he also knew he couldn't take on the loggers by himself. He needed help, and he knew exactly who to turn to. Chuck scurried off to find his closest allies, a group of animal friends who shared his passion for protecting the forest. Together, they formed a plan to stop the loggers in their tracks. The plan was risky, but they knew they had to try. Chuck and his friends waited until nightfall, when the loggers had gone home for the day. They crept silently through the woods, using their stealth to avoid detection. When they reached the lumber stack, Chuck and his friends got to work. They used their sharp teeth and claws to shred the wood, making it unusable for the loggers. They also scattered the wood in different directions, making it difficult for the loggers to collect it. As they worked, they could hear the loggers returning to the site. They had to hurry. Chuck and his team watched from a hidden vantage point as the loggers returned to the site. They had to act quickly and efficiently, knowing that they could not afford to be caught. They observed the loggers' movements and quickly devised a plan. First, they created a series of snares and pitfalls designed to ensnare the loggers as they moved around the lumber stack. They also set up tripwires that would trigger the release of heavy tree branches, which would fall and trap the loggers beneath them. Once the traps were set, Chuck and his team retreated to a safe distance and waited for the loggers to arrive. It didn't take long for the loggers to start falling into their traps. One logger got caught in a snare, while another stepped on a tripwire and was crushed under a falling branch. The rest of the loggers were disoriented and panicked, unsure of where to step or move next. As the loggers struggled to free themselves from the traps, Chuck and his team approached them. They had brought ropes and nets to capture the loggers and prevent them from causing any further harm to the forest. The loggers were surprised and confused, and they put up a struggle. But Chuck and his team were well prepared and quickly overpowered them. With the loggers captured and restrained, Chuck and his team confiscated their tools and equipment. The team approached the trapped loggers, who were shouting and cursing at them. Chuck remained calm and composed, knowing that he had the upper hand. He spoke to them sternly, explaining the damage they were causing to the forest and its inhabitants. At first, the loggers refused to listen, but as Chuck continued to speak, they started to realize the gravity of their actions. Chuck offered them a deal. If they left the forest immediately and promised never to return, he would release them from the traps and let them go. The loggers had no choice but to accept the offer, and Chuck and his team quickly freed them from the traps. As the loggers left the forest, they looked back with regret, realizing the devastation they had caused. Chuck and his team worked tirelessly for days, assessing the extent of the damage caused by the loggers. They found that the loggers had cut down many trees, leaving behind barren patches of land. The water supply in the area was also affected as the loggers had damaged the streams and rivers by disrupting the natural flow of water. Chuck and his team first began by planting new trees. They carefully selected species that were native to the area and had a good chance of surviving in the soil and climate conditions of the forest. They dug holes for the saplings, taking care to space them out evenly so that they would have enough space to grow. They also set up irrigation systems to ensure that the new trees would have enough water to grow and thrive. As they worked on restoring the forest, Chuck and his team also focused on repairing the damage done to the water supply. They cleared away debris and other materials that had been left behind by the loggers and worked to restore the natural flow of water in the streams and rivers. They also set up water filtration systems to ensure that the water was safe for the animals to drink. Chuck and his team knew that the process of restoring the forest would be a long and arduous one. However, they were determined to do their best to make things right. They knew that the forest was not just a collection of trees and animals, but was a living, breathing entity that provided life and sustenance to all who lived within it. They were committed to protecting and preserving it, no matter what challenges they may face along the way. Chuck's actions had gained him respect and admiration from the creatures of the forest. They began to see him as a defender of their home, and they were grateful for his bravery and cunning. Many of the animals began to approach Chuck and thank him for what he had done. They brought him gifts of food and other small tokens of appreciation. Chuck was surprised by the sudden change in attitude towards him. He had always considered himself an outsider, someone who didn't fit in with the rest of the animals. But now, he felt a sense of belonging and purpose that he had never experienced before. He realized that his actions had given him a new identity, one that he was proud of. Chuck and his team continued to work tirelessly to restore the forest. They repaired the damage caused by the loggers and worked to create new habitats for the creatures that lived there. They also set up new traps and defenses to protect the forest from future threats. As time went on, Chuck became a legend in the forest. His story was told and retold, and he became a symbol of hope and courage for all who lived there. The animals of the forest had learned to trust Chuck, and they knew that he would always be there to protect them. Although Chuck's actions had made him a criminal in the eyes of the law, he knew that he had done the right thing. He had protected the forest and its inhabitants from destruction and harm, and that was all that mattered to him. He continued to live in the forest, always vigilant and always ready to defend it from those who would cause it harm.